Welcome. Everyone ready? Welcome. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just like the topic of the day, we're doing this one today in English because of our guest Pauline Gagnon. Welcome. We're here today again with our Humanist Salon at the Salon des Amateurs. My name is Katrin Wiesemann, and we, the Düsseldorfer Aufklärungsdienst, are very pleased to welcome you here on site and at the screens, as we do every... Okay. As we do every first Wednesday of the month, when we present a lecture on humanism, science, and lots of different topics, including today when Pauline Gagnon will talk about her experience as a physicist and why racism, sexism, and homophobia are bad for science. Pauline Gagnon was born in Quebec, Canada, and taught physics at colleges and moved to California in 1985, where she completed her doctorate in particle physics. She then conducted research at CERN in Geneva, where she was, amongst other things, involved in the discovery of the Higgs boson particle. And in 2014, she published the book Who Cares About Particle Physics? Making Sense of the Higgs boson, the Large Hadron Collider, and CERN, and is known for her ability to explain particle physics in simple and accessible language. But today she will speak about how it is for her to be a physicist and why and how science could be better if it is diverse and open. We're very excited about the talk and are also looking forward to the discussion afterwards. That would be the point where you clap. But okay. I have to work on the dramaturgy. The evening will look like always. We do the lecture for about 50 minutes, then we do a short break, and then we open the room for the discussion. You can ask our guests questions, and if you'd like, you can join us afterwards for a little visit to the nearby pub. And if you would like to support our voluntary work here, we have a so-called culture bag, der Kulturbeutel, who's going around in the break, or of course if you would like to join us and get involved, just speak to us. Most everyone in the room right now is already doing that, so thank you for that. And now the stage for Pauline Gagnon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight, and sorry that I'm giving the talk in English. Next time I'll be sure to make it in German. So I see that some of you are interested to find out what's wrong with me. And that's the title I put for my talk, because this is the way I imagined that my colleagues were seeing me. And I'm going to tell you my personal story, but it will be for you to judge if this is really personal. So, as a child, I was born in Quebec, as you said, and I was terribly curious. All the kids wanted, the little girl wanted to be nurses or teachers or flight attendants. And I said that I wanted to be a scientist and that I would like to know what matter was made of. And I don't know why I was so curious about what was the smallest particle, smallest grain of matter, but this is an idea that I got when I was really young. So you can see me here on my first day of school. You see my parents were thinking that I would be in school for a long time. They got me an oversized bag and all that. And in Quebec, the public schools were run by the Catholic nuns. It was so. And it was an all-girls school. That was easy, so that it looked a bit like that. We all had uniforms like that. And then I went to college, and there it was mixed. So that meant that we were 2 women in the science class and 38 guys. And it was quite intimidating. And I did just like the young woman that you see on the picture. We were sitting in the front row, and we were sitting next to each other, the 2 women in the class, and we were making sure that we would be the best in the class. We knew that if we were not the best, we would not survive. We would be kicked out of the class. And we were. And after that, I was ill-inspired, and I decided to go into engineering. and I went to l'École Polytechnique de Montréal, the Polytechnical School, and there were about 2,000 students there, and 8 of us were women. I did some research, and the first woman got a degree in engineering at the school in 1959. So it was 14 years before I was there. So there were very few women, and the walls were plastered with posters, pictures, not posters, pictures of previous graduation years, and it was only men, 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 men. I never saw there were in fact 10 or 15 women who had graduated there before I went there. I didn't last, and I decided to go to the State University, which had just been started in Quebec, Université du Québec à Montréal. And there again, I was one of 2 women in the class, but there were only 10 students. So that was a bit or there were less hospitals where people spoke French and things like that. We had less access to various things, education, healthcare, good jobs, and stuff like that. So nobody encouraged me to go further than a bachelor degree. Nobody ever mentioned going to graduate school. That was seen as enough for French Canadians, especially for women. So I became a college teacher, and I was the first woman. I worked in 2 colleges, and I was the first woman in both colleges, first physics teacher. And my colleagues at the first place especially would not even work with me. It was really terrible. They would not prepare their classes with me when everybody was always doing that. It was really difficult. And I would have stayed a college teacher for all my life, and that's where I did the best move of my career. I went to a lesbian bar in Montreal, and there I met my first girlfriend, and I lucked out because she was from San Francisco. So I moved to San Francisco to be with her. And in San Francisco, in California, it was really common for women to be re-entry students. So lots of women had done various things, and then they would go back to study. And people encouraged me to do a PhD. I thought, I cannot do a PhD, come on. So I enrolled for a master's degree. And the master's, there were 5 students in the master's class, and 5 women. So it was really unusual, but really nice. And then I did a PhD, and again, I was the only woman out of 8 guys. The following year, they took 17 students, still only 1 woman. So every year, 1 woman was enough. Anyway, and then I moved at CERN. CERN, you might know the laboratory. It's near Geneva. It's the largest physics laboratory in the world. And it's there to find out what matter is made of, which was my child's dream. So that's a great lab with 13,000 physicists there. But again, when I started, it was about 12% women, and now it's around 20%. When I was in California, it was really easy because even the physicists are more progressive in California than anywhere else. You saw the map of the results of the elections in the US here last night. California is always voting Democrats. The rest does whatever. God. And in those days, I was much younger. I was out as a lesbian, and I felt invincible. So it was not a problem. I had a sexist advisor, but I left him, and I went to work with a progressive female advisor. Being a lesbian was not an issue. Nobody cared about that. And they sent me to, this professor sent me to work in another lab, which is called Fermilab, which is a large lab, also international like CERN, but near Chicago, much smaller. And our group was all women. And that you never see in physics, but that was really nice. So the professor, 3 students, 1 postdoc. Eventually, she also hired 1 guy. His name was Guy Blaylock, and we called him the token guy, so because he was the only guy in our group. But he was really nice. And this experiment, which has a very romantic name of E791, an experiment had about 70 scientists working there. And only 14% were women, but 6 women out of the 19 people who were always based at the lab. Because what happens in a group like this, like at CERN, all the scientists are not based at the lab. They work in their own university, they teach their students and all that, and 3, 4, 5 times a year they come to visit at the lab. So there was a core group based at the lab doing all the work, in fact, and there they were 32% women. So we were a larger group. I read somewhere that discrimination disappears when members of a minority group account for about 30%. And that was certainly the case there. I was giving this lecture 2 years ago in my home institute then, Indiana University, and a young black guy told me, why do you talk about minority group? We're no minority. We're just historically excluded people. And I thought this is so brilliant because it put the blames where it should be. It's not that we're defective, it's that we have been excluded from the field. So when I was on this experiment at Fermilab, the core group, there were enough women that we felt really powerful, and we had a lot of fun. For example, they told us that before we started our experiment, that the beam would come and all that, we had to do a dress rehearsal. You're in theater, so dress rehearsal means everybody puts the costumes and you do like you will do the real show. But English is not my first language, so I didn't know what it was. I said, oh, let's get dressed. And so we all put our best dress. I have my mother's wedding dress there. I no longer fit in it, but anyway. And so we did that just for a laugh. And another day, just for a joke, we always had a meeting in the same room about 3, 4 times a year, the 70 people, and we would all sit around this oval table. And all the people, all the men, the self-appointed important people would sit around the table, and us, the riffraff, you know, the low life, we were sitting around the table. So for a joke, I said, let's show up 5 minutes before the meeting, that's long enough, and we all sit at the table, the women. And so we put all the women, we're sitting around the table, and so the guys would walk into the room and have a double take because it was full of women. And we were never really visible, we were always scattered around, but that was just to make it a bit more visible, and that really worked. So we were enough women that we felt very powerful, and nobody was bothering us. It was really nice. For example, we were 2 graduate students, 2 re-entry women. We're about 30-some years old, whatever. And we were given this piece of equipment, which is called a calorimeter. And a calorimeter is just there to measure how much energy each particle will deposit in our detector. And it's an old piece of equipment that we inherited from previous experiments, and it had a leak oil. So it was leaking oil, and it meant that part of the detector was not working. And so my friend, the other graduate student, she said, let's crawl under it, we will take the bottom plate, and we will look where the leak is, and we could maybe fix it. And we went under the thing. You can see it's not very high, and my nose was too high. I had to go like this. My friend had bigger breasts. She had to squeeze everything in to get in. And so it was absolutely filthy under the detector. We found a piece of shit that was about the size of my finger from some animal that was lost in the detector, that had been irradiated how many times. Anyway, so, and it was fresh. So, you know, after an hour there trying to find a solution, we got a bit silly. And all of a sudden, we saw it was a strip under the detector. There was strips like this of about 7-8 centimeters wide, and it was just on a length of about 20 centimeters that it was leaking the oil. And we knew if we could stop the oil from leaking there, we would be done. So at the next meeting, in this oval, with the oval table, I showed what we had done to fix the detector. We had found some highly tested, world-tested piece of absorbent material that was radiation hard and all that, and we put it there. And it was really funny because the guys in the experiment, they just blush red. when I presented that. And the women afterwards all came one by one to ask me, how often do you have to change it? But we never changed it. Once did the trick. And then I graduated, and this is my graduation picture where I wear a T-shirt saying, I can't even think straight. So that was my T-shirt for my thesis defense. But after that, I moved to CERN. And CERN was a much more conservative environment. It's right at the border between France and Switzerland, right by Geneva. And I didn't have a supervisor, someone who was looking after me like my supervisor was doing, this woman that I was working with. The experiment that I joined was much larger, about 400 physicists, 10-12% were women. All of them, except one, were married to a physicist in the group, so none of the guys were making nasty comments about these women, being nasty to the women, because their husband was also in the group. But I was the lonely lesbian there, and I was too different, and it just did not fly. And at CERN, there is a great tradition. At lunchtime, every group goes out to the cafeteria. We have beautiful terraces like this, and with view on the Mont Blanc, and it's absolutely wonderful. And each group every day goes, and they round up, they go from office to office, they round up the whole group, they go there. And I noticed that people would start forgetting to pick me up for the lunch, and then they would just not pick me up at all. I would go and join them, and then the conversation would stop or whatever. I got the impression I was not wanted there. So I was 19 years at CERN, and nearly every day of those 19 years, I ate alone. That bad. So I started asking myself, what's wrong with me? And why can't I get a promotion? Why were my ideas rarely acknowledged? And when they were, it was because they were attributed to someone else. Why am I always denied a conference talk or even the possibility to attend a conference or a workshop like all of my colleagues? There was never money for me. Why can't I get people to work with me? I had great ideas, but in Atlas, the experiment where I was then, there were 5,000 people, 3,000 when I started, 5,000 at the end. You need to be large groups to work together because it's so complex. But I would never find anybody. Why was I victim of mobbing? The head of my group started insulting me in public, in front of every time every decision at CERN is taken by consensus. Nobody tells you what you have to do. We all decide together how we build the detectors, how we do the analysis, the research, and all that. And so everybody in meeting gives their opinion. Whatever I would say would ridicule me. Oh, Pauline, you're so naive. And just put me down and ridicule whatever I would say. And 5 minutes later, someone else would say the same thing, and then, oh, yeah, it was brilliant. And so it was really tough. And then why do I always have to eat alone? And you stop thinking, God, do I stink? What is that? At CERN, as I said, CERN was built in 1954, just celebrated its 70th anniversary. It was built right after the war, and it was to bring back peace in Europe, and it was one of the goals. But now it hosts, it welcomes 13,000 physicists from 112 nationalities come to do research there. They're not all based at the lab, as I said, but work from their institute and come once in a while and all that. And so you can think that it's quite a diversified crowd there. But because it started in Europe, it's still predominantly white and male. So 80% of all scientists are male, and about 80% are white. Of course, it has nothing to do with the way a physics conference looked like 100 years ago. This is a famous conference. It's called the Solvay Conference in 1909. And you can recognize Marie Curie is the only woman on that picture. And you can recognize the big names of modern physics: Einstein, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, Planck, Lorentz, all those big names, mostly Germans there. Now, going to ask you this question. Why is science still so white and so male-dominated? Do you have an idea why is that so? Conservatism, yeah, okay.
Because scientists want to be acknowledged, and maybe males are very keen on, let's say, playing with odd tricks or so.
Yeah, yeah.
They're very keen on getting acknowledgement.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so why is science still so white and so male-dominated? And the reason, in fact, is quite simple. It's because our society is biased. Our society is sexist, racist, homophobic, classist. And those stereotypes come from being constantly exposed to biases. And those biases are very pervasive. Even if we don't think that we are biased, those biases are there and unconsciously influence us all the time. So that's why people consider that science should be done by the elite or whatever, and so it should be white and male and straight and upper class and I don't know what. There was a study that was done to show what was the cause, what is in common for all this sort about biases, is that people are biased. Everybody is biased, even people who belong to a historically excluded group. Women can be sexist, black people can be racist, gay people can be homophobic, because we are exposed to all that crap too, and we end up also believing it. And there are ways to avoid biases that are so simple. For example, when you want to hire a more diverse crowd, one way to do it is very simple, is by doing anonymous application. You block the identity of the people. You have to make sure, though, that you really block all information that could reveal the gender or the nationality or whatever of the person. This was done by the School of Analytical Sciences, Adlershof in Berlin, Salsa. And it's an engineering and high-tech school. And of course, when they were doing a standard doctoral student selection, they would only get 20% women. Like the director, as the director explained, when we were not stupid, we were trying to choose the best students for our school. But they always ended up with about 20% women. And then one day, from one day to the next, they went for anonymous applications, and now they got 57% women in one shot, 3 times more. Not only that, but there's only 35% of the applicants were women, but still they selected more. It's not a surprise that there are more excellent women than the fraction of women that applied, because just like I said when I was in the, if you're not the top one in the class, you just won't survive. Your teachers will discourage you to go any further. You won't get recommendation letters, whatever. So in my career at CERN, for example, half the male physicists among my colleagues were above average, and the other half was below average. Huh? But for the women, they were all above average. You don't survive if you're below average. And so that's why it's not so surprising that 35% of the applicants were women, but they ended up with 57% women. Not only that, but the bonus was that out of 81 students recruited that year, they found people from 29 different nationalities. Because now the names, the foreign names, did not influence negatively the examiners. If you can, women don't get as many awards as men because you have to be nominated and all that. But now many awards-giving institutions started saying that you can self-apply for an award. And now they get way more awards given to women because they get good applications. But you have to present it yourself. Your colleagues won't think of you. So there is a lot of sexism in science. Here is a very good example. In 6 prominent American universities, 127 science professors were given application to Jennifer. And all those are the, university professors who think that they're above these things of being biased and all that. A very similar study was done, and the title of the paper is called, Are Emily and Greg More Employable Than Lakeisha and Jamal? So it's only if you have, again, they submitted identical series, but there were some that were Marcus and Jennifer and white names. And the white names got 50% more interview offers than foreign names like Lakeisha, Jamal, Pauline Gagnon, I don't know. Most studies on discrimination focus on gender and race, but their findings, I'm sure, apply to any type of discrimination. Oftentimes in academia, they will say, but we base our selection on merit. But merit is also biased because there are sort of hidden obstacles in the career of women. For example, if you base your choice for a professor at the university on the number of citations that their papers got. Here is a very interesting study. Someone looked at 200,000 articles, astronomy papers, published in the 5 most important, best astronomy journals, things like Nature, Science, those things. And so you know that all those articles were excellent. They were all good papers. And they saw that it started going back to 1960, and they looked at the number of citations those papers would get. And so about 50 years ago, papers published where the first author was a man, would receive twice as many citations as a paper published by a woman. And even today, in the last 10, 20 years, there's still a difference of 5–10%. So it's not completely fair for the comparison scale. One type of discrimination that people don't talk about much is the class origin. If you're from working class background, it's much more difficult to get into academia, research, and all that. Here is a big astronomy group, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. They were 350 astronomers answered the study. And you see, 22% of those people were the first ones in their family to attend university. First ones to attend university.
Which country is that?
The Sloan Digital Sky Survey is an American-based thing, but it's international. There are people from Brazil, from Europe, from a bit Asia as well. 31%, at least one parent had attended undergraduate university, and nearly half of them, their parents had a master's or a PhD. So you see, there is a big class difference. It's even worse for women. The class discrimination, 27% of the men were from a first generation student, but only 12%. So it's, when you come from a different group, all those are adding up. Being a woman, being from working class, being a lesbian, being black, all that adds up and makes it, at the end, impossible for you to go. Okay, so we looked at numbers, but we can look as well at the type of experience that the women have. This large study was done with 15,000 physicists coming from 130 different countries, so all over the world, Africa, North and South America, Europe, everywhere, Asia. And people were, so they divided the responses in 2 groups. to see, to make sure that it had no influence, being from a developing country or a very developed country. And the physicists were asked, do you have access to professional activities, like being sent to conferences, being asked to be on an editorial board in a journal, or all sorts of activities like that? And you see the difference between men and women is fairly large in both categories. Because of the large sample, we say that one standard deviation, one standard error, is of the order of 0.5%. And so it's nearly impossible to be more than five standard deviations, means that it's impossible that it's due to hazard, to luck. It's something serious. So here we're talking 24 standard deviation. It's huge. It means that the difference is clear, that there is a huge difference between the two groups. Do you have sufficient resources? Like, is your office big enough? Do you have enough students? Do you have enough postdoc, money for travel, things like that? And the women are always greatly disadvantaged. Was your career affected when you had children? Again, the difference is large. Who assumes the domestic task at home? I'll let you guess. And were you offered, that's interesting, were you offered less challenges when you became a parent? And men who become father, all of a sudden they're the breadwinner, they're responsible in life and all that, and they're given more responsibilities. But the women, it's seen as a liability. When the child will be sick, people know who is going to stay at home with the sick child. So she's going to miss meetings, and she's going to miss days at work, and they're given less responsibilities. Okay, so sexism is by far not the only type of discrimination. We mentioned race, sexual orientation, physical or intellectual handicap. One thing that you see a lot in physics in particular, but in science in general, is people who are on the autism spectrum. And there are lots of them, and they also struggle. Religion, if you're Muslim, for example, ethnic origin, that was my case, being French-Canadian. I work on an English-Canadian group. Oh my God, it was difficult. Class origin, and one that I discovered just 2 years ago was age. I gave a conference at a place called, a conference on the future of particle physics. Where are we now and what is going to happen and all that, at the Royal Institution in London. And that's a big thing, was started by Faraday. Michael Faraday was doing a lot of public lectures on physics and all that, and I was in the same auditorium where he was doing his demonstrations and all that. It was really nice. And I gave this talk, and they put it on the web. There were 100,000 people who went to look at the recording. And I went to read the comments, of course. It was interesting to see what people thought. And there were all sorts of nice comments. But then there were lots of things from trolls saying, what is this little old lady has to tell us about the future of particle physics? She should go back and not knit socks. And you see the spotlight, I don't know if it does the same thing tonight, it was really shining on my white hair. There's one half that is more white. It was shining on that one. And so my age was really showing on that. That's why I'm showing the picture. But that was really hurtful. There were lots of those comments about my age. It was really disturbing. And it had never crossed my mind before. But men, oftentimes, when they are older, are seen as more experienced, wisdom and all that. I don't know what your experience. I'm spotting the ones with the same hair color as me, but I don't know what your experience, or those who still have some, yeah. And but I don't know what your experience has been, but it was interesting. But throughout my career, call me stupid if you want, I never thought that my sexual orientation, who I love, the person I love, could have any effect on the type of physicist I can be. Call me stupid. I never thought it could have a link. But this sexual orientation was really determinant in the way people treated me at CERN, but I didn't know. And that's why for 19 years I was asking myself, but what's wrong with me? Because I could feel something. I started a women's group, and I could tell that the other women were not having it as hard as I did. And it's only about 6 years ago that the American Physics Society published a report on the climate for LGBTQ people in physics. And they found the following, that LGBTQ people are isolated. We don't have networks, mentoring, role models. We experience or observe exclusionary behavior. It can be sexual or verbal harassment, homophobic comments, exclusion from study groups or working groups, or social activities, eating together, expectation of incompetence. At CERN, a friend of mine is non-binary and all that, and they, I don't know which pronoun he uses, but he would go around and just knit very fancy shawls and doing that, and said, yeah, I like to be in your face and do that and provocative. But he said, you will never catch me being wrong on my physics. But do you realize the pressure that it put on him? That he always had to be 120% sure that everything was perfect, because we are assumed to be an idiot if you're gay or a lesbian. LGBT physicists with additional marginalized identities face most discrimination, and they found that lesbians experience it 3 times more than gay men. And then it dawned on me what it was. And people of color, it's even worse for them. So as I said before, if you collect too many tags, woman, black, lesbian, working class, whatever, handicapped, you don't make it. And the transgender and gender non-conforming physicists encounter the most hostile environment. I've heard testimonies from various people, trans people and non-binary people. It's just heartbreaking. Here is an example of silly things biases make people say. Ben Bars was a professor of neurobiology at Stanford University. And one of his colleagues heard him give a talk one day, and he said, oh my God, he didn't know that Ben was a transgender man. And he said, Ben Bars gave a really good talk today, but his science is so much better than his sister, because he had seen lots of papers published by Ben Bars when he only changed his first name, when he changed his sexual identity, his gender. And so, I don't know what was his name, but the colleague assumed that it was his sister who had published those papers. Bars is not so common. So, but it was the same person. You know, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, it's clear that Ben is so much better than whatever Jennifer Barr was. Unfortunately, this young man died of cancer a few years ago. One thing that affects many people, men and women and people from all groups, but mostly women from, and people from historically excluded groups, is called the imposter syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's mostly affects highly successful women who can't acknowledge their achievements. If you ask these women, are you afraid that sometimes, are you sometimes afraid that others will discover how much knowledge or ability you lack? People will see that you're an imposter, and many people will say yes. People fear that one day it will be revealed that you're a complete moron. Is your high ability the major cause of your success? No. These women will attribute their success to the fact that, oh, I had such a supportive advisor, or I lucked out when I got this job, this high promotion. And do you feel highly confident that you will succeed in your future career? Very few women can say yes, no. I affirm that. And so it affects lots of people who we can't believe that we belong to the field. no wonder, because we are constantly told that we should not be there. All the prejudices result in discriminatory views and policies that affect women and people of color and other members of discriminated groups. And when managers and colleagues treat you differently due to those biases, it just fuels this imposter syndrome, this feeling of not belonging there. So you question your own value, and you're being put at risk of suffering from this imposter syndrome. And it leads to feeling absolutely miserable, and many women quit due to that. How to fight the imposter syndrome? Just a few hints that can be useful. Take a deep breath, try to reassess the situation. You know, when you're giving a talk and you suddenly you think, oh my God, what are they thinking of me? Try to take a deep breath. But of course, it's much easier to do it offline and use a two-column assessment. You know, you have one column where you have all the undubitable proofs that you're a total idiot, and all the proofs showing that, no, you're very competent. Okay? And so you make this two column, and you can ask also, you can be kinder to yourself. This little nagging voice, we are rarely as nasty to others as we can be to ourselves. And it's always good to seek valuable feedback from trusted people. A more senior person, an advisor, or a mentor. A mentor is really important. If you want to help others, if there are younger people in your group and you don't want them to go through that, mentoring them help a lot. And make sure that the workplace is inclusive. You know, when people go out for a beer after work or at a conference, and make sure that everyone in the group is invited and included, that, you know, the guy from Iran or the woman from Japan is not left behind, you know, that everybody is invited. Be kind to colleagues. I put that because in physics we're just so nasty. You rarely have a colleague who will come to tell you, hey, God, that talk you just gave, your work that you just, wow, that was good, brilliant. That idea you had, wow. We don't. It's really tough. So when I say that in a physics crowd, people say, yeah, it's really terrible. And we rarely get positive comments on our work. I spent 19 years at CERN, and the last 3 years I was with the communication group, and there it was mostly women. No, it was all women except the chef, but it was also very nice. And there wasn't a week, if it's not a day, where a colleague would not come and tell me, wow, that blog you just wrote, that was brilliant. That interview that you gave to this journalist, that was really good. And so I got so much positive reinforcement that it really reversed the negative effect of the imposter syndrome. And it really changed everything for me. So I left CERN in 2014, and the first thing I did was to write this book about particle physics, because I love physics, and getting this positive feedback gave me enough self-confidence to write this book, something I would never have been able to do 3 years before. And I swear, this is the best book, best popular science book on particle physics that I will ever write. So I highly recommend it to you. It's also available in German with a similar title. So, how did I survive? For those of you who are struggling, here are some clues on how it can be manageable. It was by fighting the isolation. And the first thing I did was to co-found Atlas Women's Group. So Atlas was the experiment where I worked, and I gathered the 200 or 300 women who were there, and we formed the group. And I also joined the LGBTQ group once it was started, but that was many years later, in 2010. And I held on to my feminist ideas. When I was a college teacher, I was part of the feminist group there, and we used to say that the personal is political. And so not take it personally, but to see it as a global story. But it's really tough. You have to be goddamn tough to hold on, you know. But it certainly helped. There is an article that I found was brilliant, which is, the title is How to Make Women of Color Thrive, that is, succeed. And so they look at, in a physics department, some university in the US, where there were some black women, and how did they manage these women? And they said that these women succeeded because the department made sure that the workplace was a safe place. When I was going to a women's group at CERN, or LGBTQ group, it's just that we have a safe place where you know that nobody will make sexist or homophobic comments, and you'd be supported. And it should be like that in every one of our working or study group, that the whole group fight microaggressions. If there is a sexist joke, like a friend of mine told me, she was a student at Stanford University as an undergraduate. She was from a poor family in New York. She was sent there on grant money, and she was the only woman in the class of 100-some. And the professor would always walk in the class saying, "Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, gentlemen." Or he would make blatantly sexist joke, and then all the guys would turn towards the only woman in the class to see if she would explode or say something and all that. So when there are microaggressions like that, it's not the white, the woman who should answer, or the black person, but the man or a white person should say, maybe, "What is that? What is that for a stupid joke? What is funny there in your joke? I don't get it. I don't get it." You force the other person, you show the other person that, no, he's not allowed to make a sexist joke. You don't buy into it. All the other guys in the group don't laugh. And nobody laughs with him, and he turns to be the one who is isolated. So that's important. Break the isolation through social events. You have a physics discussion, but you also have beer and pizza, so everyone could feel that they belong to the group, and it helps fight the stereotypes. In that university, it was rich white guys and poor black women, so they had a lot to bridge between the two of them, two groups. One stereotype in physics that is very, very powerful is this thing about being so goddamn intelligent. And we are not born physicists. We are trained to be physicists. We learn to become a physicist. And when you become a young physics student, people say, "Oh, you think you're the next Einstein?" Or what? You know, there's always that thing going on. And so this is one thing that I am dedicating most of my time these days, is to fight the stereotype of the lone genius in science. Because Albert Einstein was always presented as this lone genius who, out of the blue, came out of the patent office in Bern with the theory of relativity. But nothing could be further away from the truth. Everything he did with his wife. Everything he did up to 1914, so probably part of general relativity as well, was done with his wife, Mileva Maric-Einstein. She's absolutely unknown to the world and to the physicists. So I'm working now on a mini-series on Mileva Maric-Einstein and other forgotten female scientists. And so this is we have all the episodes written, and we're going for Monena and all that. It's moving on. The lack of diversity is a social and political problem. There is no scientific evidence for the intellectual superiority of men or white people. But those stereotypes are still there because so many scientists try to twist the science to prove it. And there is a book that is really interesting to read by Angela Saini, called Inferior. She reviews all those studies that were done trying to prove the inferiority of women, and they don't hold water. And I swear, I was a physicist at CERN for 19 years, and I've never seen any of my male colleagues use his genitals to fix a problem. It's not required for the job. You don't need it. So how can we achieve more diversity in our group? There was a very interesting paper published a year ago called How Well-Intentioned White Male Physicists Maintain Ignorance of Inequity and Justify Their Inaction. So it goes on about how men who describe themselves as progressive, how they avoid and justify to themselves not doing anything about it. And mostly by putting distance about it. They say, yeah, we know that there is a problem with sexism and racism in science, but not in my group, not in my university. It exists, but not where I am. But these guys don't go and make a study to see what is the reality, and the reality is that it's everywhere. And the second way that these guys avoid taking action, they blame big problems. Well, you know how the school system is messed up, and they discourage young girls of other minorities from going into science. Well, it doesn't explain the leaky pipe. You know, there are women get their PhD and all that, and they start in academia and all that, but they leave much faster, at a much faster, higher rate than men. So women leave because the climate is toxic. And people, sometimes people will say people of color are poor and they quit their studies early because they want to have a job. Well, not all people of color are poor. And physics, it pays well. We were well paid. So, you know, it's important for people to stay longer. And racism and sexism are rooted in history, which is true. But it doesn't explain why is that worse in physics than in any other field. It's way worse. Physics is the worst. And to justify their inaction, they also say, well, I don't know about what to do. If I speak up, it makes me uncomfortable. I fear that I will make the young guy feel bad. And the person who was attacked doesn't want more attention. The diversity officer should take care of that. So the problem is that they don't try to learn more and be more active. So we should make it white men in physics and in science and everywhere in society are the best place to act against sexism and racism. So we should hold them accountable for their ignorance. And it's really nice, when I give this lecture, there are more and more men coming to the talks, which is something that did not exist 10 years ago. So things are changing, and it's really very comforting to me to see so many men here tonight. Here is one last point that I want to make. Oftentimes, we talk about the best strategy to encourage female students to come into science. Well, it was only about sexism, but it can apply elsewhere. So here are different approaches that have been tried. Having an all-girl physics class. So oftentimes, the girls don't want to perform too well in math or physics because they fear that if they look too smart, they won't get a boyfriend. So they made just all-girl classes for that, having a female physics teacher, having female guest speakers, discussing the work of female scientists, or discussing the underrepresentation of women in a physics class. Which one do you think would be the most efficient to convince young girls to come into science? That, oh yeah, I should go there. I like it. First one?
Discussing the work of female scientists.
Very good point. Yeah, you think so too? Well, it's the less appealing, but apparently it's the most efficient. It's to discuss the underrepresentation of women in physics, because then the young women will hear that there is nothing wrong with you for wanting to go into science. There are no women in science because the society is biased and because there is sexism that is prevalent. And once you know that, I always knew that I was different. When I was in college, I was one of two students in the class. I always knew I was different from the other women. And I thought it was because I liked science. I didn't know I was a lesbian. It took me a while to figure it out. But it's so silly. The rejection of women in science was strong enough that I mistook it for my sexual orientation. Anyway, so this is the most efficient way, because women will then hear that there is nothing wrong with them, and for the young men, it won't discourage them, but it will make them aware that there is a problem, and they will probably be more active as being allies and all that. Creativity. Why is diversity so important in science? Because creativity is essential to good science, and diversity and creativity go hand in hand. This sanitary napkin that we put into the detector, there isn't a guy who would have thought of that. You know, it's not in your everyday experience. So when we are from different cultures and all that, I've seen it countless times, diverse groups do better work. And this is documented. So my take-home messages for you here, so if you want to go into science, don't hesitate, stick with it. Despite everything, I was really happy to be able to work in physics and find out what matter was made of. If you belong to the privileged group, if you're a white person, fight the racism, be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And it is time for white men to do their part. And if you belong to a historically excluded group, and if you belong to many, don't stay isolated, find allies. It can be people like you, but it can be any of your colleagues, just by making them see. Did you hear the comment that this guy just made? No. Can you understand that it makes me feel bad? So let's change our work and study places into safe places. So I'm afraid that there was nothing wrong with me, if you were here to hear that. And I'm sure that there is nothing wrong with any of you either. So thank you for your attention.
Okay, then we're making a short break. We're back? Yes, we're back. Great. And we're opening the round for some questions. And I have one question there first.
Hi. You said in your presentation that all the discrimination in physics is the worst. Do you have comparisons with other fields? Like, is it mostly the same bad and physics is just a slightly worse, or is there a big gap and other fields are a lot better, or what?
Well, in physics, it's worse for the numbers. Is there more discrimination in physics than elsewhere? I don't know, but there are much fewer women in physics, about 20%. In biology, it's more than 60-70% of the students are women. In chemistry, it's similar. But in physics and engineering is also quite tough. So that's why I use that and I extrapolate. There hasn't been any study on the toxicity of the climate for women, but I think it goes with the proportion of women that you find in the field. You know, it's interesting to see that in biology, it's 70% women among the students, but among the professors, it's about 20%, 15-20%. So it really changes. You know, you have more students in a field, but if you look at the number of professors, if you go at high school and college and university level, then there are very few remaining. So even in fields where it's predominantly female for the students, the professors are, a large majority is still men. So it is. But yeah, physics is notoriously tougher. That's where you find the least women in the field.
Okay, next question.
So first of all, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation, and I'm actually shocked that the effect of these prejudices is still so strong today. And my question is, I mean, you have presented very scientific and sound evidence about how illogic these prejudices are. So, considering that you are working in a world of scientists, they should actually fully acknowledge your argumentation and chime in what you say. So what has the reaction of other scientists or professors been?
Well, I've given this talk probably 40, 50 times in different colloquium talks in physics and all that. And it's always very well received. And you can really see a difference with the age groups. Among younger crowds, students, young researchers, men and women, you know, you find a lot of young men coming to those talks, but very few older professors. I gave the talk recently in Stuttgart to a group of plasma physicists, whatever. And there was one guy who was a retired person, and he didn't talk to me, but he spoke to the organizer of the conference and he said, "My God, I never heard or seen any of that." You know, he spent all his life in physics, and he never noticed that there were no women around, you know, something like that. So it was, but the older people, it's more difficult to get to them. But I gave this talk in my home university, Indiana University, where I was a researcher for 15 years. And a lot of the discrimination was by my very progressive colleagues. And I gave the talk there. And it was quite interesting to see their reaction, because they're all very nice. They all invited me at their home for dinner and all that. But, you know, it's... And I think today they would react more differently. Like when I was insulted giving talks at CERN, and my boss was in the audience, and he didn't dare speak up. But he couldn't sleep all night, he told me the following day after that. And he still feels ashamed of that. And he has difficulty being around me because I remind him of the shame. But these colleagues now would act differently, but not all of them want to be put in front of it. The most progressive one was, he didn't want to hear about it, and whatever. But the young people, they're more open-minded. Those ideas have been circulating more. And I can tell it is changing as well at CERN, too. And people of my age groups are all retiring now, or retired, and it's getting better. It's getting better for women, for gays and gays and lesbians. There's still very few people of color. That is a really, really strong bias. But things are changing. But at CERN, for example, I've been offering to give them this talk at CERN. And one of my colleagues, a woman who was very homophobic and very, gave me shit throughout. I worked with the same experiment as her for the 19 years I was there. She always gave me a lot of trouble. And she was in charge of organizing the colloquia. And she said, "Oh, no, this is absolutely not a matter for CERN. This is absolutely nothing of interest to us there." You know, I'm still not able to give this talk at CERN. And when I succeed in giving it there, then I'll retire. But they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. Certainly the group who was with me, you know, the people around my age or whatever. But I could tell that the younger people was different. And when I give these talks around, I see also the difference. The age makes a big difference in the reaction of people. So people below 50 are more open.
Because hopefully society is changing.
Yeah.
Slowly. I have one question. You gave some great examples how to deal with those situations, either for yourself or for others. But in a lot of areas, we fight, or we have this thing that responsibility is individualized. So I have to change. What would you wish for the lawmakers to change to support more diversity in physics?
It's very difficult for the person who is being attacked to defend herself and all that, because you look like, oh, you're just trying to defend yourself. You're not trying to defend. It's not because what has been said was wrong, said against women. So it's very difficult when you put the responsibility to an individual to fend for herself. It should be done by institutions, and there should be training for everyone to learn about, oh my God, yeah, maybe we have been doing science in the wrong way, and maybe we should be a bit more aware of things. And
for example, to put it in the curriculum to talk about underrepresentation of women in physics?
Yeah.
Something like that? If it's proven that it
Yeah.
does so much.
Yeah, it was a study done by Harvard, I think, but it showed that it was the most efficient way to convince young girls in high school to stick with science when they loved it. And they would not feel like, I must be really odd because I like science. I don't know how often, when I was starting, I was asked, why are you in physics? You're not even so ugly, maybe you could, whatever, things like that. If you were, the oddest thing, and none of my colleagues, the young men who were around me, were questioned, do you want to do science? Everybody assumed because he liked it, and I liked it, but that was not enough. But I didn't know, for example, when I entered the Polytechnical school, that the first woman to get a diploma had gotten it 15 years before I was there, which is nothing. Yeah.
Any more questions? Not really. So I have another one. Who do you think, besides, I didn't remember the name,
Mileva Maric.
Maric Einstein, who's other, besides Marie Curie, important women physicists who are not acknowledged?
Oh my God.
Too many.
There are legions. What is really shocking, in doing the research for this series that we'll call Eclipsed, because the women have been forgotten, eclipsed in science, is we thought, I did this research with a friend of mine, Vicky Lindsay, an astronomer, and we thought that we would find lots of examples of women like Mileva Maric who had been thrown out of science, but in fact, those you never hear about them anymore because they disappeared. We know of Mileva Maric because she was the wife of Albert Einstein, so there are circumstances. But what we found, or what she found, in fact, is that there are tons of women who were incredibly successful and even acknowledged in their own days, like Caroline Herschel, who was an astronomer, German astronomer, maybe Australia? No, she was from Hanover. Yeah, that's it. She was a German. And she was acknowledged in her days and all that, but as soon as they died, forgotten. There is a theorem that we use in particle physics, Noether's theorem. Noether's theorem. I used it countless. It's the most important theorem we have in particle physics, in quantum theory and all that. And I never knew that it was Emmy Noether, a woman. And we know that everybody knows Noether's theorem, but we don't even know that it was a woman. And there are countless astronomers, in particular, who were extremely successful and very acknowledged in their days, but then absolutely ignored, forgotten afterwards.
So I have another question.
Yeah.
Do you considering writing another book presenting all these women?
No, I'm doing the. We're doing this. We're doing the series instead. I think it will have more exposition or whatever, say, if it works. And yeah, I wrote a book. That's good. And but there are so many women who have done great things, and either they're not credited for it, or the credit is given to their brother, like that was the case with Herschel. She was working with her brother, and he got a lot of the credit. And another one, she was working with her husband, and the husband was given the credit. But then he said, no, that was my wife. I'm terrible with names, so I cannot name them all. But now I see the names of these women coming out up in different places. So these women, now there is a will in the science community to bring back these women in the limelight.
So the series will be filmed?
Yeah, it will be a series for on Netflix or something.
Oh, you will definitely have to tell us when it's on.
Yeah,
so
8 episodes. Yeah. 10 episodes. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you know when you expect that?
Oh my God, probably in about 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. It's,
okay.
No, it's
Stay tuned.
Yeah, 8 hours. No, it's like
Yeah.
making 6 films or something.
Of course.
Whatever.
I've got another question.
It's less a question than a comment on women that are not seen and things that change, because Wikipedia, where a lot of information comes from, and if you have made it, if you're a scientist that is influenced, then you're in there, and a lot of women are not in there, but there are groups that are starting to change that. So like this year from the science boat that goes around, they had one meeting in Cologne where they met with people to get women into Wikipedia that made contributions to science. So, but this is something that everybody can do.
Yes.
So if somebody out there looks at this, and if you know about a woman that contributed to science and she's not in Wikipedia already, put her in there. Wikipedia is community made. But this is something that can be done by everybody.
I changed the wiki page on Mileva Maric to rectify the facts a few times, but then there's some people always changing it, and I gave up. I gave up.
Wikipedia has a problem of
Yeah.
itself.
So it's problematic because on Mileva Maric, what is on the wiki page is not really good. I haven't looked at it lately, but I know it's pretty bad. But I gave up. Eventually, those people will die, and then we can. The old guard is. There's nothing to be done with them, you know.
Yeah, let's hope that we can go forward in the right direction, even with the young people. Sometimes it's easy to lose hope.
Yeah.
But if there are not any more questions, there is another question.
Since we are now from questions over to comments, I would want to make a comment saying my experiences have been different. I mean, I started my academic career in physics 3 years later than you did, and not in Canada, in the US and in Germany, and also not in particle physics, but solid state physics. But still, I mean, I saw similar phenomena, like there are so few women, but like what can we do to get more women into the field? And I vividly remember we came across statistics in the late 80s showing that Germany only has 10% of physicists being women, whereas Romania has 50%, and we were amazed. Wow, how do they do this? What can we learn from them? What can we copy? So from that perspective, it was quite a surprise to hear about all of the hostility. And maybe I take a question back to myself back home, thinking about, is it something that I've never seen, or was it just not there in the places where I was?
Before I answer, do you know why there are 50% women in Romania, Turkey, Bulgaria? Do you know why there are so many women in physics in those countries?
No idea.
You want to get more physicists in Germany, you have to drop the salaries. When the salaries are so low, men are not attracted to the jobs. And when the salaries in countries where the salaries are high, like Germany, US, Canada, Denmark, Austria, Japan, the number of women is below the world average. Number of women in physics, CERN. But when the salaries are low, it's not a profession that is attractive to men, and therefore women are welcome to take care of it. And that's all it is. There are exceptions to that, because in Russia, the numbers are low and the salaries are low. So in Russia, there are other factors playing. Russia and all the old Soviet republics, they're in their own category. There is some dynamic there that I could not quite figure out. But this theory was mentioned to me by a friend of mine from Turkey, and she said, she was saying, yeah, it's because our salaries are so low. Because I did a study and I found that where do we find most physicists, and it was in the Balkans. And it's because the salaries are so low. And there were also very high numbers of women in France and Italy, where the salaries are much less than in the rest of Europe.
It's quite funny. I work in an area where there are more women, and we actually joked about we need to get more men that were paid better.
The salaries will go up, yeah? It's known. It's known.
Yeah, pretty cynical. But last chance for a question, because then we would wrap up this really nice evening. Thank you for this Humanist Salon, and a big applause for Pauline Gagnon for this great lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very nice. And I have an applause for a great crowd tonight. Really.
Thank you.
Quality, if not quantity. So that's good.
So a little bit more thanks to the Salon des Amateurs that we can stay here every time and make our lectures. Thank you very much. And also, of course, to all the helpers from the Düsseldorfer Aufklärungsdienst making this possible. Yeah, if you would like to support our work, you can donate, or you can just join us and help us make more of these events and spread the word. So in December, we have our next salon, which is called Satanism Today, Atheist Religious Life. I'm very curious to what they have to tell us about that. And yeah, as I said before, if you would like to join us in the pub, we're going there in a few minutes when we've cleaned up here. And we thank you all for coming and wish you a safe journey home. And I want to close, as every time, with a sentence. Today, first time in English. Let us continue to work for an open society in which we can all live well together and not lose the courage that this can be achieved, especially on this day. Please remember. See you again.